Exhortation. When is the last time you gave a sermon that was an exhortation? Not to strive about words to no profit, to the ruin of hearers. 2 Timothy 2:14. So annexed to that idea is unnecessary information in the sermon. Unnecessary information in the way that you deliver the sermon. Within the bounds of the classes of sermons, the preacher should never weigh the sermon down or encumber them with secular details or too much studious information. Study is made of the passage of Scripture, so the preacher may formulate his message not to show the congregation the study he made. Give attention to that. If you're exhorting your congregation and you're demonstrating to them how smart you are because of the study that you made on a particular passage, that is not the content of the sermon. It goes back to, if you've watched some of the other ones, the question of what time is it? And I start telling you about the functions of a clock. Give attention to that. In all the classes that we have, there is, through the exposition of the text, direct exhortation to them, and it must be precise and it must be poignant. Direct exhortation ought to make up 1/3 of the content of your sermon. Such exhortation is grounded and founded on cogent arguments. That's part 2. This is part 3 from part 1, which was the text opened. All sermons have argumentation or a logical order about them to bring the hearer to a certain intellectual place so that you can then exhort them to get to that emotional/spiritual place. Dabney says these classes of sermon will assist the pastor in cultivating that variety within scriptural limits, which is so useful to interest and instruct his people. By preaching doctrinally, practically, and historically with judicious alterations, he will show himself a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So if you're in a rut where you're preaching the same kinds of sermons over and over, it would be like just somebody monotonously speaking at a particular tone the entire time and never changing ever over the course of a year or 2 or 3, and this is the way that I talk. It's like a robot. People will catch on to your inability to put together a sermon in that particular light because you're so focused on one certain kind that you might think you're good at the exclusion of all the others that you should be giving them, you don't have a well-rounded art of homiletics. Rather, we have to cultivate that variety so that you have a topical sermon and a doctrinal sermon. But yet, it's set within the scriptural limits that the Bible has. Maybe you're preaching through a particular book, but every single book of Scripture, every epistle, every poetical book, every historical book will lead you through all of these different kinds of sermons and classes. So you have to be aware with these alterations that you show yourself capable of being able to apply the art of homiletics to all of them.